Not every silence is empty. Some carry voices, forgotten, but you are listening, want you to whisper abyss. The forest breathed in its own way, not the soft, soothing sigh of life, but a heavy, deep inhale, holding ancient secrets within the dense foliage and the darkness beneath the thick canopy. For Mason, a forest ranger who had spent most of his life amidst the silence and rustling of nature, the forest was both home and guardian. Every morning, as the thin mist still clung between the towering pine trees and the scent of damp earth mingled with the fragrance of morning dew, Mason and Juno, his loyal German shepherd, began their patrol. Juno, her golden brown fur shimmering in the sunlight that pierced through the leaves, always ran ahead, her sensitive nose twitching, catching every whisper of the wind and hidden trace on the ground. However, this morning, there was something different in the air. Not just the usual stillness that enveloped the forest, but a tense silence, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Juno, usually full of energy, walked closer to Mason's side, her ears occasionally twitching with alertness. Her animal instincts had likely caught a subtle ripple in the forest's harmony, imperceptible to human senses. The unease began when news of the disappearance of two experienced hunters, Tim and Jake Reeves, reached the ranger station. Both were men who knew this forest like the back of their hands. They wouldn't simply get lost. Simultaneously, reports of two young men, the Patterson brothers, who had been camping in the northern part of the forest, added a thick layer of anxiety. 4 lives swallowed by the forest in a short time. This was no longer just a series of ordinary incidents. A cold premonition crept down Mason's spine. This forest held dangers, from steep slopes to wild animals, but the disappearance of seasoned hunters was a sign of something unnatural. He knew he had to act. The search began. Mason contacted Thomas Whitefeather, an elder from the Peakit Reservation bordering the forest. Thomas possessed a deep understanding of this forest, not just from the perspective of someone who lived within it, but also from the inherited knowledge of his ancestors. Stories passed down through generations about forest spirits and the creatures that lurked in its darkness. When Mason met Thomas at the edge of the forest, beneath the shade of ancient oak trees whose branches stretched like gnarled arms, he could feel the aura of wisdom and seriousness emanating from the old man's eyes. Thomas's deeply lined face told tales of seasons that had passed and secrets he had witnessed. "The forest is restless, Mason," Thomas said, his voice soft as the rustling of leaves in the wind. "Something has awakened, something that should not have been disturbed." Together, Mason and Thomas, with the faithful Juno leading the way, began their search. The tracks of the hunters and the young men were faint, as if they had not only gotten lost, but had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of struggle, no cries for help heard, only a terrifying silence. Their journey led them through treacherous paths, across small streams whose water chilled them to the bone, and up steep slopes covered in thick moss. Each step on the damp, earthy ground took them deeper into the heart of a forest that felt increasingly hostile. Then they found the strange tracks, not the footprints of humans or any animal they recognized. The prints were large, deep, with sharp, deep claw marks, far bigger than any bear or wolf tracks they had ever seen. The prints looked as if they had been pressed with immense force, leaving deep impressions in the soil. Thomas stopped, crouching beside one of the tracks, his wrinkled fingers gently touching the distorted edges of the earth. The expression on his face shifted to one of deep concern, his usually calm eyes now reflecting a profound worry. "Gugway," he whispered, the word almost inaudible. Mason frowned. He had heard the stories of the Gugway, a legendary creature feared by the native tribes of this region. A beast larger and stronger than any known predator, with a burning rage in its eyes. He had always dismissed the stories as mere folklore, tales to frighten children at night. But seeing these tracks, feeling the fear emanating from Thomas, he began to doubt his beliefs. "Are you sure?" Mason asked, his voice hushed. Thomas nodded slowly. "The tracks. There's no mistaking them. The Gugway has returned." The atmosphere of the forest suddenly felt different. Every sound, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the snap of a twig beneath their feet, the distant hoot of an owl, felt menacing. They were no longer just searching for missing people. They were facing something far more dangerous, something that had returned from the depths of myth and legend. With their knowledge and skills, Mason and Thomas fought to survive in a forest that now felt hostile. They moved cautiously, observing every sound and every shadow. Juno, with her keen instincts, became their extra eyes and ears, providing early warnings of potential danger. They found the remnants of the Patterson brothers' campsite. The tent was torn to shreds, equipment scattered, and the faint metallic scent of blood hung in the cold air. There were no bodies, only the horrifying signs of destruction. The sight sent a cold wave of fear through Mason. This was no ordinary animal attack. Then, they found the tracks of Tim and Jake Reeves. Their footprints mingled with the Gugways, telling a tale of a desperate chase. They found signs of struggle, broken branches, and churned earth, but no bodies. The Gugway had taken them. The encounter with the creature finally happened in a dark and damp valley, where the trees grew so thickly that sunlight barely penetrated. Juno was the first to bark, her usually cheerful sound turning into a low, fearful growl. Then, Mason and Thomas saw it. The Gugway was massive, far larger than the biggest grizzly bear they had ever seen. Its body was thick and muscular, covered in jet-black fur that seemed to absorb all the light around it. Its eyes glowed red like burning embers in the darkness, radiating an ancient rage and hatred. Its claws were long and curved, looking capable of tearing through steel. Its roar, when it finally erupted from its deep throat, was an earth-shattering sound, one that made their hearts pound and their blood run cold. The confrontation was dramatic and brutal. Mason, with his ranger experience, and Thomas, with his mystical knowledge of the creature, fought side by side to survive. They used everything they had, hunting knives, axes, and their knowledge of the terrain to combat the Gugway's immense strength and ferocity. Juno, despite her fear, stayed loyally by Mason's side, snapping and growling to distract the creature. The fight felt like an endless nightmare. The Gugway was fast and powerful, its attacks relentless. Mason and Thomas were injured, but they continued to fight, driven by their instinct to survive and the desire to stop the terror that had been unleashed in this forest. Finally, with courage and a bit of luck, they managed to force the Gugway to retreat, wounded and enraged, disappearing back into the darkness of the woods. They had survived, but they knew that this encounter had changed them forever. As they rested, exhausted and injured beneath the silent trees, Mason pondered what had happened. He had faced something beyond his rational understanding, something that proved there were forces greater and older than humanity lurking in the depths of nature. The knowledge of the Gugway's existence was a heavy burden, a terrifying secret he now had to bear. Thomas, tending to his wounds, stared into the dancing flames of a small fire. The old stories often hold truth, Mason. We are just too arrogant to believe them. This experience taught Mason about the fragility of humanity's relationship with nature. The beauty of the forest concealed unexpected dangers, and sometimes the most real threats were the things we could not see or comprehend. He had patrolled these woods for years, but only now did he truly understand how little he actually knew. Fear had become a part of him now, not a paralyzing fear, but one that made him more alert, more respectful of the hidden powers of nature. He knew that the scars of this terrifying encounter would never truly fade. He would continue his life as a ranger, but with a newfound awareness that there was a creature out there, in the darkness of the forest, far more terrifying than any wolf. The knowledge of the Gugway, once dismissed as folklore, was now a legacy he had to carry. He would pass on the story to future generations, not to frighten them, but as a warning to always be vigilant against unseen threats, to respect the mysterious and sometimes deadly power of nature. The forest continued to breathe its deep, secretive breaths. Mason, with Juno by his side, would continue to watch over it, but now with more open eyes and a more wary heart, realizing that beneath its beauty and tranquility, nature held unexpected mysteries and terrors, waiting to be awakened. And sometimes the stories we heard as children were not just tales, but whispers of warning from the darkness. The night at the ranger station felt desolate and cold. The fire in the hearth danced lazily, occasionally casting dim light onto the rough wooden walls. Mason sat lost in thought in his chair, his gaze blankly fixed on the flames. Juno curled at his feet, occasionally letting out a soft sigh in her sleep. But Mason's mind was far from the tranquility of the night. The image of the Gugway's red, angry eyes continued to haunt him, its roar still echoing in his ears. The encounter had opened his eyes to a reality he had long ignored. This forest was not just a collection of trees and wildlife. There was something older, something stronger, lurking in its depths, something that could not be explained by logic or science. The Gugway. The creature of legend was real, and its return brought a terror that threatened the balance of nature. Thomas Whitefeather had returned to his reservation, carrying both physical wounds and a mental burden as heavy as Mason's. They both knew they had seen something they shouldn't have, and that knowledge had changed their lives forever. The next day, Mason decided to return to the site of the battle. He needed to understand more about the creature, to look for clues they might have missed in the chaos of the confrontation. He enlisted the help of a few other rangers he trusted, men with courage and open minds. They moved cautiously, guided by their own tracks and the terrifying imprints of the Gugway that still scarred the valley floor. The valley seemed even more desolate under the pale morning light. The trees stood like silent witnesses to the battle that had taken place. The ground was torn up in places, broken branches lay scattered, and the faint metallic scent of blood still hung in the cold air. They found deep claw marks on the trunk of a large tree, over 10 feet high, demonstrating the creature's immense size and power. In the middle of the valley, they found something that made the hair on Mason's neck stand on end. A small amulet, made of bone and feathers, lay on the ground near the Gugway's tracks. The amulet looked ancient, tied with coarse, frayed thread. Mason picked it up carefully, feeling a strange coldness emanating from it. This belongs to an ancient tribe that inhabited this region long before we came, said one of the older rangers, a man named Ben who had knowledge of local history. They believed in forest spirits and guardian creatures. Was the Gugway one of them? Mason asked. Ben shook his head slowly. Number the Gugway is something else. Something even they feared. They believed the Gugway was a manifestation of the forest's rage itself, a vengeful spirit that would rise if the balance of nature was disturbed. Ben's words added a layer of mystery and dread to what they were facing. If the Gugway was truly an embodiment of the forest's wrath, then confronting it would be far more difficult than facing an ordinary wild animal. Mason took the amulet back to the ranger station. He felt there was something important about it, a key to understanding the creature they had encountered. He contacted Thomas again, telling him about the discovery. Thomas came to the ranger station the next day, his face looking older and more weary than before. He took the amulet from Mason's hand carefully, his eyes studying every detail. "This is a protective charm," Thomas said after a moment of silence. "Made to ward off evil spirits and creatures of darkness." "Then why was it near the Gugway's tracks?" Mason asked. "Perhaps someone tried to fight it," Thomas replied thoughtfully. "Or perhaps the Gugway itself destroyed it as a symbol of its power." Thomas explained more about the legend of the Gugway from the Pequot tribe's perspective. The Gugway was not just a wild beast. It was believed to possess cunning intelligence and supernatural strength. It could move silently among the trees, disappear into the darkness as if swallowed by the earth, and its roar could freeze living beings with terror. According to the legend, the Gugway would only awaken if there was a great disturbance to the forest's balance, such as excessive logging, uncontrolled poaching, or other human actions that defiled the sanctity of nature. The Gugway's return was a sign that the forest was angry, and it would hunt down anyone deemed responsible. Mason remembered the reports of increased illegal logging activity in the northern part of the forest in recent months. Could this be the trigger? Had the forest's rage manifested into this terrifying creature? A heavy sense of responsibility weighed on Mason's chest. As a ranger, it was his duty to protect the forest. If the Gugway's return was a consequence of their failure to maintain the balance of nature, then they had to do something to stop it. Together with Thomas, Mason began to formulate a plan. They couldn't fight the Gugway with physical strength alone. They had to understand the creature's nature, look for its weaknesses, and perhaps try to appease the forest's anger that it represented. Thomas took Mason to an ancient sacred site in the heart of the forest, a circle of stones hidden among towering trees. In that place, the ancestors of the Pequot tribe had performed rituals and communicated with the spirits of the forest. Thomas explained that to understand the Gugway, they had to try to understand the language of the forest, to listen to the whispers of the wind and the rumble of the river, to seek guidance in dreams and visions. Over the next few nights, Mason and Thomas spent time at the stone circle. They meditated, trying to quiet their minds and open themselves to the sounds of nature. Mason, who had always relied more on logic and physical observation, felt strange with this approach. However, he trusted Thomas and his wisdom. Slowly, Mason began to perceive something different. In the deep silence of the forest at night, he started to hear sounds he had never noticed before. The whisper of the wind through the leaves sounded like faint words, the murmur of the river like an ancient melody. In his dreams, he saw dark shadows moving among the trees and felt a cold, watchful presence. Thomas explained that the forest was speaking to them, giving them clues about the Gugway. They had to learn to interpret this language. One night, as the full moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver light that pierced through the gaps in the leaves, Mason experienced a vivid vision. He saw the Gugway standing in the middle of a burning forest, its roar a cry of sorrow and rage. Around it, trees were falling and black smoke billowed into the sky. In the vision, Mason felt a deep sense of pain and despair. as if he were the forest itself being wounded. When the vision ended, Mason jolted awake, his body covered in a cold sweat. He told Thomas about what he had seen. "The forest is dying," Thomas said with a sad tone. "The Gugway's rage is a reflection of nature's suffering." They realized that to stop the terror of the Gugway, they couldn't just fight it. They had to heal the wounds of the forest, to restore the balance that had been lost. Mason and Thomas decided to investigate the increased illegal logging activity in the northern part of the forest. They journeyed there, following trails that became increasingly damaged and disturbed. They found the tracks of heavy machinery, piles of abandoned logs, and the smell of disturbed earth. They also found human footprints, not just the tracks of the loggers, but smaller, lighter footprints. The tracks looked familiar to Mason. After examining them more closely, he realized they belonged to one of the missing Patterson brothers. The tracks led them to a hidden cave behind a small waterfall. Inside the cave, they found the young man. He was alive, but weak and terrified. He recounted a horrifying tale of how he and his brother had been attacked by a large black creature with glowing red eyes. His brother had not survived. The young man had managed to escape and hide in the cave. The young man also mentioned that before the attack, he and his brother had seen a group of people performing a strange ritual near the logging area. They had lit a large fire and chanted in a language they didn't understand. After the ritual, they saw a strange light in the forest, and then the creature appeared. The young man's story provided a new lead. Perhaps the Gugway's return was not just due to the damage to the forest, but also to other human actions. Perhaps an ancient ritual that had awakened or disturbed it. Mason and Thomas knew they had to act quickly. The Gugway had already preyed on humans, and if they didn't stop it, more lives would be at risk. They had to find a way to confront the creature, not just with violence, but with understanding and perhaps by restoring peace to the angry forest. Night fell again over the forest. Under the pale light of the moon, Mason and Thomas prepared to face the Gugway once more. They carried newfound knowledge, a strong resolve, and a faint hope that they could end this terror and bring peace back to the forest they loved. They knew that this battle was not just for their lives, but for the soul of the forest itself. The information about the strange ritual became a beacon in the darkness of the mystery surrounding the Gugway's return. Mason and Thomas returned to the hidden cave to speak with the surviving young man. Carefully and patiently, they tried to delve deeper into his memories of that night. The young man, named Billy, still appeared deeply traumatized. His voice trembled as he recounted the horrors he had witnessed. He vividly remembered the towering bonfire in the middle of the newly cleared logging area. Its light danced wildly among the remaining trees, casting eerie shadows that moved like dark specters. A group of people, about 5 or 6, stood encircling the fire. They wore dark robes and their faces were hidden by hoods, so Billy... Key story ends, but the echoes stay with you. Sleep tight if you dare.